Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to a very special session today. And this is the beginning of a four-part e-seminar, which is jointly organized by Delphin Ntanyoma from Institute of Social Studies Erasmus, Netherlands, and this is going to be a very interesting discussion comparing two cases of Rohingyas and Banyamulenge in Congo. As a tradition, before we begin, we do treaty acknowledgement in Manitoba, Canada. And the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So this is what we traditionally do, and thank you very much for attending. And the way we planned our today's session is as follows. We would first listen to the keynote speaker and his insights on the topic, and followed by Delphin Ntanyoma's presentation. And then I will follow up with my presentation and comparing the case between these two groups. And finally, Thomas Shacklock from Genocide Watch UK will present his paper. And then we'll open up for the live Q&A session as well as Facebook and YouTube streaming. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Gregory Stanton. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be able to speak to you this morning on this very, very important issue. As you know, genocide has been following for some time, and I think I better get my. I'm hearing some back feed or something like that. Anyway, we have been issuing genocide alerts about the situation in the Kivus and Ituri province and other parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo for many years. In fact, it was one of the very first places that we issued a genocide alert back in 1999. At that time, there was genocide going on between the Hema and the Lendu peoples, and we got the evidence of it and lots of films of it, and became, I think, probably the first organization to alert governments to that genocide. Unfortunately, the same dynamic is going on right now in that same region, and it's for the same reasons. The basic problem is that the one side thinks that it is the indigenous population of that area, and the other are the other people, namely the Banyamulenge, the Hema, and other groups are supposedly invaders from the Great Rift Valley. It boils down to also a racial and ethnic division in which the people who are considered invaders, the Banyamulenge and the Hema and other groups of that sort, are considered nilotic. That is, they share characteristics of other nilotic peoples. The Maasai, the Tutsi, a lot of other peoples, and they're the old stereotype is, well, these are the tall peoples. The other stereotype is that the Lendu, the Hutu, other groups that are of that group are from the, quote, Bantu race. And they're for the most part, farmers, whereas this is the stereotype. I'm only telling you the stereotype because it's false. It's a false stereotype. In fact, it was in many ways invented by colonial powers. Speke was famous for his so-called Hamitic hypothesis, in which he claimed that these Nilotic peoples were a lost tribe of Israel. He believed they were the natural rulers of the area of Rwanda and Burundi and that whole area, Uganda and so forth. And I mean, it was a fabrication. I mean, the truth is that Hema, Banyamulenge, all of these so-called Nilotic peoples have lived in the Democratic Republic of Congo for centuries. It's not some kind of invasion. It is like the difference between so-called racial groups that people invent all around the world. Now, the truth of the matter is there's only one race, the human race. And these racial divisions have caused so much genocide, have resulted in so many terrible deaths of millions of people, that we must overcome them. We must overcome these divisions. The Banyamulenge are particularly persecuted now and are the victims of genocidal massacres. They have been impoverished in Fizi, in Tombe, Ufira, and so forth since 2016 by large-scale cattle raiding. The UN has reported that 110,000 Banyamulenge were displaced in South Kivu just this past year, from October 1st, 2019 to May 31st, 2020. Hate speech, a very common characteristic of genocides, has also incited massacres of the Banyamulenge by militias from other groups, the Bafuliro, the Babembe, the Bayindu. These are groups that have traditionally had very harmonious relationships, but have suddenly become incited to genocide. Weapons have been distributed that allow them to commit mass murder. And so the result has been displacement of literally over hundreds of thousands of people. Lendu militias have targeted the Hema also for being Nilotic. This same indigenous versus invader narrative has been used to justify those genocidal massacres. In January 2020, 701 Hema were killed in attacks between December 7, 2017 and September 2019, according to a report issued in January 2020 by the UN. Hema women and Banyamulenge women have one of the highest rates of rape in the world. Rape is a common characteristic of genocide because it literally is genocide, the attempt to replace the genetic makeup of one people by another. This whole narrative must be contradicted. It must be challenged. It must be overcome. That there are some people who are the indigenous inhabitants and other people are invaders. It's been used in so many other genocides. The Rohingya genocide is another case in point, where the Myanmar government has claimed that the Rohingya are actually invaders from Bangladesh. Well, they aren't invaders. They've been there for centuries. And the truth is that the whole modern nation state has contributed to this phenomenon by drawing borders around people and then having one group, usually the majority group, claim that the minority group is an invader group. What is problematic in this situation is also the politics between the nation states. We now have, of course, in Rwanda, a country that has literally come back from one of the worst genocides in history. At least 800,000, mostly Tutsis, were slaughtered in that genocide. It was a planned genocide. It followed all of the stages of genocide that we use at Genocide Watch to do early warning about genocides. In fact, I saw this one coming 5 years before it happened. I was in Rwanda. I was living in Rwanda. And I was there as an academic specialist looking at the justice system to give advice to the Rwandan government about how they could make their courts work better. And in my field work, because I'm an anthropologist as well as an international lawyer, I discovered that people were carrying ID cards that included whether they were Tutsi, Hutu, Twa, or so-called naturalized. And I said to myself, because I've studied genocide for many years, this is symbolization. This is one of the major steps of genocide. This could be used for genocide. One night I had dinner with Joseph Kabaruganda, who was the president of the Rwandan Supreme Court. This is 1989. And I said, can't you get these ethnic IDs taken off of these ID cards? And he said, unfortunately, we don't have judicial review. You'll have to appeal to the president for that. So I got a meeting with Juvenal Habyarimana, the president of Rwanda. I went in and met with him. And we discussed, reforms that could be made in the judicial system. But we also then, I asked him to please take these ethnic identities off of the ID cards because they could be used for genocide. And when I told him that, his face froze. It was as though a mask went down. What I then realized, I guess, not right away, but I realized I was talking to the wrong man because he was for genocidal massacres and in fact had led some. So the problem then was, what could we do to prevent this genocide? And as I left this meeting, I said to the president, if you don't do something to prevent this genocide, you're going to have a genocide within 5 years. And his note taker took that down. And so did the person that was with me. Well, in 1994, as you know, that genocide began. April 6th and 7th, 1994, the huge genocide of the Tutsi in Rwanda began, and it took 800,000 lives. And during all of that time, it was even denied that it was a genocide by the US State Department. We can't have that kind of denial happening again. It must be never again. We must have the capacity and the will to prevent these genocides. Well, right now, we do have one of the largest peacekeeping operations in the world, right in the Democratic Republic of Congo, MONUSCO. MONUSCO is the largest, I think, peacekeeping operation in the world right now. And yet, even MONUSCO and the Congolese army have not been able to stop these genocidal massacres. In fact, there's evidence that some of the people in the Congolese army have even participated in some of these. We are hopeful that there'll be justice done for some of the commanders who, in fact, where there's evidence that they did participate. So what can we do about this? Well, first of all, we have learned at Genocide Watch, the first job is knowing that it is genocide, getting the facts, and then alerting the policymakers in the world. So getting the facts, that is crucial. That is your role. You must collect the facts. You must make sure they are readable by policymakers and that they are publicized in an effective way. And Genocide Watch will help you do that because we have many contacts inside governments and inside the UN. We also then need determination to have rapid response. That's the second thing that has to be done. Now, MONUSCO is already there. So we could have a much more effective mandate in the UN Security Council for MONUSCO that would actually make it have to defend the lives of civilians much more vigorously than it has. I used to write mandates for UN peacekeeping operations when I was a officer in the State Department. In fact, I wrote 37 UN Security Council resolutions about that and about other issues, such as setting up the Rwanda Tribunal. I was the person who wrote those resolutions to set up the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. So that is the second step. We need rapid response, but it needs to be effective response, and it needs to be supported by the great powers of the world. That's why it's important, especially for people in the diaspora, for people in the US, in the UK, and in Europe, in the Netherlands, in the EU, and elsewhere, to get to the policymakers and demand action to stop these killings. The best action, of course, is if it can happen from within the DRC. Also, however, there can be help from neighboring countries that would support the Banyamulenge and the Hema and other groups. However, that kind of support cannot itself become genocidal. And that, unfortunately, did happen in the early 2000s. And that's why Ntanyoma was just convicted of genocide for his massacres of Lendu people. Those are the steps that need to be taken to prevent. But the next step is punishment. We have to establish judicial institutions that will actually punish the people who commit these crimes. And to do that, you have to catch them. You need people out there to arrest and put these people on trial, and you need effective courts that can actually convict these people and imprison them. Because only through that kind of punishment can there be a deterrent that will eventually halt this kind of massacre and this kind of genocide. We hope at Genocide Watch that this history of genocide in the Eastern Congo, and for that matter, also in Rwanda and Burundi and Uganda, this history must be brought to an end because we are all members of one race, the human race, and we must stand in solidarity together to defeat genocide once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gregory Stanton, for your insightful and I would say quite, it leads all of us to think how we should act from our platforms to stop genocide. Thank you very much for your part of the speech. We appreciate it very much. And given your long experience in the policy-making positions, I think it was worth for our audience to listen directly from you how it and what it takes to draft all these important policies to stop genocide. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Gregory Stanton, I would say, skillfully showed us what are the telltale signs of a genocide and what should be done by the international communities in terms of accountability and justice, and what is the actual situation on ground in Eastern Congo that we are speaking this morning. So next up, it's time for Mr. Delphin Ntanyoma from Institute of Social Studies, Erasmus, Netherlands, to present his paper and do his speak. But also he's the co-coordinator of this whole series, and we both met in a seminar organized by Center for Genocide Studies in Bangladesh last month, and then onward we were exchanging our ideas to hold this seminar today, and we are so delighted that it came into existence. So Delphin, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I'm very honored to be part of this debate, though I'm a co-organizer. It's through the commitment of CRRIC team, and specifically Dr. Ahmed, whose effort, invaluable effort, managed to get this point. I'm really thankful for your team. Oti has been sending many messages at the same time. She has done a great job. Thank you, Oti. I'm so thankful to Dr. Greg. I know he has a very busy agenda, but in the end, he managed to give us the insight, but also be part of this initiative to save the humans in the Eastern Congo. I'm so thankful to Thomas, whom I've been speaking to, and the whole team of the Genocide Watch. They've helped me to at least get to the point of getting in touch with the researchers who are working on Rohingya. I'm so thankful to Dr. Lazar, who's having a great job on the ground in Minembwe. He's based in Minembwe, trying to support local communities. But also Adele and George, who are part of the Banyamulenge diaspora community. I'm sure they have time to discuss their challenge, but they are the only one who currently are supporting Banyamulenge in Minembwe. Thank you so much for your effort. Rukumbu's Delphin Ntanyoma, Ph.D. student within the Erasmus University, Rotterdam, part of the Institute of Social Studies. My focus on the PhD project works on Eastern Congo, mainly in North and South Kivu. Myself, I'm part of the Banyamulenge community. For the sake of reflexivity and positionality, I think I have to make this clear. Thank you so much, Dr. Gregory, for reminding us that we are all a member of one race. Unfortunately, this is the main issue as you've described it. What's happening in Eastern Congo and mainly around Banyamulenge, it's a racial problem. That's a racial issue. See, because colonial administrators thought there are different categories of people and who have settled in different times in their native region. You allow me to go through my few slides to possibly illustrate what's happening around Banyamulenge. I think it might make sense than the discussion itself. I have a few slides with me.
Delphin, you have a share screen option.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Um, is it a person? Hello?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the outline. I hope to move a bit because of time. Here's the snapshot of my PhD project. I'm trying to understand what makes people to engage or disengage in violence, working in North Kivu and South Kivu, as I've mentioned it earlier. Part of my research, and when I was visiting my native region, Minembwe, but largely the South Kivu, I managed to talk to many people, including Banyamulenge, but also their neighboring members of their neighboring communities. I was so much worried over the future of the region. I tried to discuss this with many people, friends, but also member of the UN peacekeeping mission. I thought it was a very hard to get this region more stable. Then, when the violence was going on and the Banyamulenge being more targeted, I wrote a paper called the Genocide Warning, the vulnerability of Banyamulenge who are considered as invaders. The paper has been posted on a Genocide Watch website. Thank you so much, Dr. Gregory, for having facilitated this step. But the main argument, as I've been discussing with many people, it's hard to disentangle violence from the causes of violent conflict. That's why I'm going back to the Gatung conflict triangle. Gatung advises to go deep and look what's the main issue, what's the main causes of violent conflict. And that's the main point I'll be discussing and look at it in my paper, but also when presenting the situation of Banyamulenge. It's going deep and see what's the contradiction. We locate the contradiction and the incompatibility. Otherwise, whenever we start counting violent incidents, we end up finding everyone as a culprit. What's the point here? Anyone who is trying to contest what's happening on Banyamulenge, they keep waving a story saying, look, Banyamulenge also have their own, or a group, self-defense group who are affiliated to this community. But my point is, we need also to understand why these guys have taken guns. Banyamulenge living in South Kivu region. That's one of the 26 provinces of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Their homeland is located at the intersection of three territories. That's Mwenga, Fizi, and Uvira. If one needs to locate the origin of Banyamulenge vulnerability, it has to go back, as stated Dr. Gregory, on the racial history and the legacy of colonization in Eastern Congo. They were painted as newcomers, immigrants within the dichotomy of Bantu and the Nilotic, who includes enlarged the Tutsi. Banyamulenge originated from Burundi, Rwanda, Tanzania, and possibly Uganda. Despite their pre-colonial history, when you read different documents written during the colonial period, Some have settled during the 16th century, but because the colonial administration have thought they are newcomers or immigrants, they are still vulnerable up to date because of this. The colonial administration went further by abolishing their autonomous customary chieftaincies, thus making Banyamulenge as locally stateless. But even if you go through the 2006 DRC constitution, you can still see Banyamulenge as still stateless locally, but also at the national level. They have been discriminated against since then because of not having their own customary chieftains and also being seen as an immigrant. At some point, their citizenship has been revoked. During the 90s, the Sovereign Conference has decided through what's known as a Banyamulenge Commission to expel Banyamulenge. To what, where, I don't know, but they do simply say they are Rwandans. Even though we have some groups and some clans within the Banyamulenge who settled in this region from Burundi or Tanzania. Following their discrimination, and probably with their grounded claims, they started to ally with the regional countries who have their own interests to militarily claim their rights. And that's partly what explains the 96 and 98 wars in Congo. But also we needed to mention, that's a part of the Banyamulenge history. Some have probably felt this was not the right way to keep claiming their rights. We even have some Banyamulenge military who have opposed Rwanda. They fought in 2002. They've been at the front line opposing some groups or insurgencies backed by regional countries. I've started to read myself through my book, which I'll be sharing maybe the cover page. They are currently being a victim of having been involved, at some first place for being invaders. At the second level, having been involved, or some of them having been involved into the insurgencies, but also they probably being victim of having opposed such insurgencies. Here's my book. It describes to a large extent the history of Banyamulenge and the domain of military, how they've been killed. As you see the picture, some of these guys were trying to look around and get different opportunities, but whenever they found their relatives, family members being killed, it seems that they have no other choice. That's why we needed to go back and look at the contradiction as advised Galtung. I'm sure this will be discussed by Dr. Azar, but it's a destruction. They are destroying everything. Even to the point of destroying the foundation of our house. Thousands, hundreds of villages were burnt down. From 2017 up to now, this is the picture of actors who are operating around Banyamulenge. We have regional countries, we have many groups, but also we have at the center the national army. It's very complex at the extent needs to go deep and understand what it is. Otherwise, if someone looks superficially, you tend to see simply violence. That's a part of the Uvira territory. More than 100 villages of Banyamulenge were burnt down in this region. This region is simply targeted for one single reason. It's because Banyamulenge have had a traditional chieftains in this region. It's called a groupement. Then anyone who needs to context the existence of Banyamulenge has to go by destroying such a local entity. Within the 100 villages where Banyamulenge were living, there remains only 5, almost 5. From November 2018 up to now, hundreds of people Banyamulenge who are living in these 5 villages can no longer move to Uvira, while their neighboring communities have such right to freely move. Bafuliro, Bavira can move from Uvira up to the local area called Bijombo Groupement. They can move from this region up to Fizi or Mwenga. It's only Banyamulenge who was surrounded. I do call it they are besieged to some extent. When these villages were destroyed, we had a lot of armed forces, the national, so-called the national forces. As you see, the A represents the deployment of the national army. That's the other region next to Bijombo. Almost 150 villages were burnt down in Kamombo and Bijombo. As you can see, that's the Bijombo. Anyway, one more point, interesting point. Here's a base of the UN peacekeeping mission. It's within a distance of less than 10 kilometers from where Banyamulenge are besieged, but they haven't intervened for one reason, saying Banyamulenge are being protected by their own militia. That's the same point in a village. Sorry, on Itombo and Kamombo. When Kamombo and Itombo were destroyed, as you can see, there were more than 20 army deployment. Within the hundreds, we still only have a few Banyamulenge living in an IDP center, an IDP site located here, where you can find a UN peacekeeping mission, the MONUSCO. The IDP has been attacked more than 5 times. Why? There is a MONUSCO within meters, but also the National Army. That's the same story in Minembwe. One more important point, maybe, Ahmed, I want to make this clear. Around May, this region here, Banyamulenge youth who organize themselves into what's called the self-defense group, because those who were living in Bijombo were besieged. They couldn't get nothing as food. They didn't have any humanitarian assistance. They started to find an alternative. And then they moved from Bijombo up to this region, Kamombo, where some have fled from Kamombo to Bijombo when Kamombo was destroyed and attacked by Mai. What strikes me, they found National Army deployments, living next to members of Bafuliro and the Babembe communities. That means when they were chasing Banyamulenge from this region, they started to live together with the National Army and but also these communities. And then what happened? The Banyamulenge local defense, because they didn't have any other choice, they started to fight so that they can return back to their villages. But I'm sure, since they returned to this region, those communities who were guarded by the National Army have fled. I don't know if they fled because of fear or they were threatened to some extent, but they fled. And then Banyamulenge have few families have moved to Bijombo to this region, but they are still being attacked. And then when they are attacked, they are being attacked by Mai militia with the support of the National Army. And what? And it may take longer. I think maybe as we go further, we'll have a time to discuss this. Minembwe serves currently as a shelter of more than 100 displaced who came from Itombwe, but also from Kamombo, and those who lived in the past in the neighborhood of the Red Cycle. Here again we have a UN peacekeeping mission in Minembwe Center. From June last year up to now, Banyamulenge living in Minembwe cannot move within 2 kilometers outside of the red line. Instead, Minembwe has been attacked in a coordinated way, systematically, by militias Mai with the support of Burundian to a large extent. More than 40 times. I know the village here, that's it's called Kawser. 2 weeks back, the village was burnt down by an attack that took place between 7th and 9th September. That was 40 times the same village being attacked. And what's happening when Banyamulenge are being attacked here? That's the time their cattle were looted, and Mai attacking, this militia attacking Banyamulenge have always found corridors next to National Army deployment. They enter, destroy, attack, kill people, they loot cattle, and then go back again through the same corridors. Minembwe was destroyed, while since June last year, we have more than 18 military deployment. But what's striking, we have people who have moved, friends, people whom we know, who have moved, let's say, from Masha, that's one of the village, and they fled to Mishasho, for instance. That's a distance of almost 5 kilometers. That means anyone who used to live in Masha and have fled to any of these villages inside the red cycle, he or she no longer have a right to go to his or her field. Within 2 kilometers in April, that was on the 18th, 2 women were decapitated because they were trying to find an alternative by going to their own fields. Another story of what's happening to Banyamulenge is that members of the Bapembe, Bafriro, and Banyidi communities who used to live in a neighborhood, they can still move freely. I do talk to them as part of my research. We have a member of the Bafriro who were our neighbors. My native village is located somewhere here. That's 161. The military has started a business of getting foods and crops from Banyamulenge neighboring communities who sometimes use the Banyamulenge fields. They collect foods and crops, they bring them to a military deployment, and then some of neighboring Bashi and Bafriro, we still have a few Bafriro up to last week who were living inside the red side connected to Banyamulenge. They were the only one who have an authorization to go to the military deployment, buy foods, and then bring them in a market where Banyamulenge are besieged. It's a very long story. It starts long ago, from 64. And what makes a difference between Banyamulenge and other communities? I know there has been massacres in the region during different insurgencies, but Banyamulenge have been killed in a selective way, mostly through a public call. I think this will be discussed by Jean-Pierre on a case of Abdullah in Dombasi. In 98, many were killed because of the call made by the former President Laurent Desire Kabila under his entry. We have many cases recapitulated in the mapping report, where you find Banyamulenge were killed simply because a governor of South Kivu, governor who is currently a minister of internal affairs, have called military gangs and militia to kill Banyamulenge, or they had to leave Congo. We have cases in Gatumba where Banyamulenge were killed in 2004. The specificities of what's happening in the Banyamulenge is there is a tendency of hiding evidences. We have a case of more than 300 dead bodies who were killed in 96. Politicians, local politicians who have been involved. And one of these is visiting tomorrow Minembwe, have decided to dig up and get the dead bodies, the remains, and dump them in a Lake Tanganyika. That's something that has happened in 2004. I've been told when I was writing my book, in Kamina, where 300 military officers who were unarmed, they were in a training center. They were all killed, more than 300, and then over the mass grave where they were buried. I've been told the military have decided to construct a building. We have cases of more than 140 children who have been taken as a hostage in 96, and they were probably in Tanzania. There are some clues because 5 of them have returned back to their families. But no one can give such information. It's not only killing Banyamulenge, but also their territories where they used to live is getting more narrow. This is one of the example. We have had Banyamulenge who lived in Katanga province. It's currently called Tanganyika. More than 30,000 were expelled militarily and moved to South Kivu. That means Banyamulenge can no longer move easily to Katanga. And that's one of the reference when recent violence around Banyamulenge, people were mobilizing. They keep referring to what happened to this Banyamulenge in Katanga. They're simply saying, as we managed to force them to leave Katanga, we can still force them to leave South Kivu. Those who were living in a Fizi territory, a region called Nganja, they were expelled in 71, but also recently in 96. But also a region called Mirimba. That means my interpretation is that they are narrowing their territories. It means someone is planning to force them to leave. Why are they attacking Minembwe? The attack on Minembwe is targeting Aruru municipality. Aruru municipality has been enacted by letter 2018 because the rural municipality is enacted in a region where Banyamulenge majority people started to mobilize and take guns. Maybe that's the last point. I think I've discussed this. Anyway, that's another president attack to Banyamulenge. We haven't ever had such mobilization, but also an alliance of more than 4 large ethnic groups and their affiliated militia come together to attack Banyamulenge. It's happening in a regional warfare where we have Burundi and Rwanda interfering in. But also it's targeting local authority, as I've mentioned, Bijombo, but also Minembwe rural municipality. It's targeting their economy and livelihood. But also it targets, I think, the culture. Keto and Banyamulenge community is part of their culture. By impoverishing it to such extent, it's affecting their culture. We have more than recent reports, more than 165,000 cows who have been looted since 2017. It increases the military capabilities of these armed groups. There is a complicity of the national army. It's well known. Banyamulenge have no humanitarian assistance. They are systematically attacked in a coordinated way. A recent attack early September, Minembwe was attacked through 13 directions in one single day. In one single day, militia coming to attack Minembwe from 13 directions. This is maybe the last point. It's really complex, but I think we still need to understand what's the main issue, the contradiction. Simply because Banyamulenge are considered as invaders. Anyone who is trying to mobilize, either politically, either militia, it's very easy simply call the youth and telling them we are chasing invaders. Here's people who are hegemonic, who are trying to occupy our lands. And then tends to be an open cause on their side. I think we needed to overcome this, as I've mentioned, Dr. Gregory. But also we needed to look at how to assist the people. It has been 2 years since the recent attacks where Banyamulenge, even Minembe, Bijom brothers, when Mitenge, being besieged, attacked regularly, while they cannot access even their feet within meters, within few kilometers. I keep wondering what's the MONUSCO doing. I'm expecting maybe in the next session we have a discussion on this. But I still think there is a gap between the technical expertise and contextual knowledge. I'm really worried MONUSCO might not be well equipped in terms of contextual knowledge, because MONUSCO, but also the UN jointly human rights organization working within the MONUSCO, they still understand this as an inter-community violence. Those who are attacking Banyamulenge, they operate under something called nationalist ideology. They're trying to preserve attacks against their land. Then I think there is something we needed to work on this. There is another main issue currently at the central level, making Banyamulenge more vulnerable. I do see a sort of manipulation from the governing alliances in Kinshasa, made by 2 groups, by 2 political platforms. One is known FCC and Cash, Tshisekedi and Kabila. I do see a sort of manipulation around this problem. Thank you so much. It's very complex, but in a summary, Banyamulenge state of being. Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Delphin and Ntanyoma's very detailed presentation on the conflict regarding Banyamulenge in Eastern Congo. Ladies and gentlemen, just to remind you that we are watching the first part of 4-part seminar, e-seminar, organized jointly by Conflict and Resilience Research Institute and International Institute of Social Studies at Netherlands. And the title of the series is Unwanted Peoples and Boundaries of Citizenship Struggles, Rohingya, Banyamulenge, and Others. So at this point, I am ready to present the case of Rohingyas, and I shall use a couple of slides just to give you an idea, because my title of the talk today is A Minority at Risk, the Case of Rohingya Parallel to Banyamulenge. And we have heard both Dr. Gregory, Stanton, and Delphin quite details about the various aspects of the genocide perpetrated against Banyamulenges, and you will find a lot of similarities, ladies and gentlemen, in both the cases. And I'll quickly share my screen so that you can have a look on these slides. Okay, so I'm trying to kind of up my presentation here. And I hope it's going to work here. Okay. So I'd quickly start with the minorities. Who are the minorities in Myanmar, and within the various groups of minorities, how Rohingyas are being placed. So that is the basic objective of today's presentation. And just to begin with a couple of disclaimers. I am not a Rohingya and I do not speak on behalf of them. I am an independent researcher, but I was born and raised in Bangladesh and spent most of my adult life there. And I'm well aware of the situation of Rohingyas escaping persecution and genocide in Myanmar since 1991. So to start with the focus discussion here today, Myanmar is one of the highly diverse and multicultural, nation state in Southeastern Asia. If you look at the chart, and I have taken this pictograph from Al Jazeera's report, and you'll see the detailed map of Myanmar, and where you will see there are more than 135 major ethnic groups grouped into 7 ethnic minority states. And this is actually a Myanmar government's description of minorities. If you go a little dig down a little bit, you'll find the names of the minority groups: Shan 9%, the highest, Karen 7%, Rakhine 4, Chinese 3, Indian, Mon, and others. So if you add up all, then you will find it's over 30% or nearly 30% of Myanmar's total population, those who constitute minorities. And they speak more than 100 languages in Myanmar, Burma or Myanmar. Um, so I would start how these groups became minority and why minority is a problem. And this is one of the interesting point of departure, that how this polarization of and between and amongst these ethnic groups occur. So I'll just quickly go back to the initial I would say historical part of British intervention, what we call British colonial period between 1824 and 1948. 1948 is being the year of independence of the then British Burma to current Myanmar. So we are talking about 3 Anglo-Burman war, started from 1823 and ending up in 1885. And with this 3 Anglo-Burman war, actually Britain completed its colonial full administration on an authority with the current, Myanmar's state of Myanmar and the then Burma. But what happened with this Anglo-Burman war? All this war actually pitted various ethnic groups against each other. And this is the very typical way of colonial period administration, because in order to remain in control, the British government always used to co-opt some group and prioritize some groups over others. And next, I'll quickly switch to the second important episode of minority history within Myanmar. And this is what is the Japanese annexation during the Second World War, and what we know 33rd Armies, and then Allied victory between the period of 1942 and 45. And just so that you know, Japan's Imperial Army advanced and almost came up to the very southern border of now India. And while they advanced and captured all these territories, they co-opted local Buddhist population because of similarities of faith. And when the situation changed after Allied forces started taking over the places from Japanese Imperial Army, they co-opted the local Muslim population, i.e., the Rohingyas. And this, seesaw situation in that particular area actually pitted these Rohingya Muslims against the local Buddhist or Rakhine Buddhist, as we call now. So this is one of the flashpoints when the violence actually broke out, and from an unsubstantiated source, we also learned that there was a riot at this time that cost possibly over 8,000 lives on both sides. And then I switched to the 1946 Panglong Treaty, where minority groups were brought together. And if you can see the slides properly, you'll see the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, General Aung San, with a number of minority leaders. And what he actually kickstarted is an idea of bringing all the minority groups under one umbrella and so-called nation state. And we all know what is the situation up now, but it was his idea to bring them under one nation state, and that carried on by his daughter now, Aung San Suu Kyi. And before NLD, her political party took over the previous military-backed government in 2016, actually started the first part of 21st century Panglong. So this whole Union Peace and Dialogue Joint Committee that is in the core of this Panglong Peace Initiative is aimed to bring all these minority groups together, because there is a reason why it is so. As you see in the screen, politics, social economy, security, land and natural environment. And in the third round of the 21st century Panglong conference, actually Aung San Suu Kyi said the following, and I quote, "To cease armed conflicts, it is very important to achieve political agreements that are acceptable to different forces. The National League for Democracy, in short NLD, that is serving as a government in accordance with the wishes of the people, firmly believed and held on to this belief since it became a party, that political problems can be resolved only when a democratic federal union is established. Ethnic armed organizations also had consistently spoken of the requirement to establish a federal system for conflicts to end." Unquote. So this is the basis of this 21st century Panglong Peace Initiative, because ethnic minorities are embroiled in a perpetual war against the central government since its inception in 1948. So this is what is the core of the problem of ethnic minorities throughout Myanmar, and Rohingya is just one part of it. So there are more than 20 active armed organizations, those who have taken arms and waging armed resistance against the central government of Myanmar. And most, I mean, the major groups from the ethnic perspective is Kachin, Shan, Karenni, Karen, Mon, Arakan, and Chin ethnic states. And these groups are sometimes they sit together and discuss about their issues. But as I said, this whole armed conflict is perpetuating in this region. Now, how do you see Rohingyas within this mix? Rohingyas, I mean, I'm not going into the detailed background of this group because most of you might be aware by now. So Rohingyas is an ethnocultural and group living in that area for centuries. Well, the actual debate about the identity or the name of Rohingyas is often contested because British government never used this word officially. Rather, they used to term them as Arakanese Muslims. So the Rohingya, the name itself, if we take the official account and the history, we see late 1940s that the name officially came into existence. But if we go back to history, we see the name was used by the Scottish explorers, those who first came into the area and kind of undertook ethnographical research. So the place used to be called as Roang. So the people from that area used to be called Rohingya because the language they spoke is called Rohingya. So there is an existence of this group of people in this area for centuries, and you might see some echo with my explanation here with Dr. Gregory's observation that there is always a contest to portray or stereotype a group of people as invaders or intruders, and Rohingyas are actually portrayed as an intruder. In this slide, a couple of timelines that I want all of our audience to have a quite, the intense look, because 1948 and 62 is the period of 14 years when Rohingyas were actually acknowledged and recognized by the then state of Burma. And after 1962, when the military took over, led by General Ne Win, and up to 78, there were a number of military operations carried out in the northwestern part of Rakhine that created a number of exodus. Actually, after the independence of Bangladesh in 1971, 1978 is the year when the largest, the first, I would say, in the recent history, exodus took place, and over 60,000 Rohingyas fled their areas and took shelter in Bangladesh. And in 1982, another important year in the history of Rohingyas, being a minority and excluded from the overall constitution from Myanmar, because Myanmar officially destribed them from their citizenship. 91 and 93 is important year again, because this is the second time or the second largest exodus happened because of ongoing military operations in that part of the area. And to an account, we have over 260,000 of them fled their areas and took shelter in Bangladesh. So between 93 and 2003, there were two repatriation agreement signed between Myanmar and Bangladesh. And we have some data that how many actually went back is roughly around 50 to 60, 2,000 Rohingyas went back, and rest remain in that area. And as you all know, after 2012, between 2012 and 16, another very important the time frame of the history, because the exodus again started with the start of the riot in the city of Sitwe. And between these 4 years, in various small numbers, Rohingyas were expelled, and finally the largest one in 2017, with the plea that there was an attack against the Myanmar military by a ragtag group is called Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. So this timeline, as you see, Rohingyas were not only treated as minority, but also were expelled deliberately from this place. And I would like to also link Delphin's presentation here. In one of the slides, he said slow genocide. Actually, one of the academics and researcher, Azim Ibrahim, he wrote a whole book in 2016 entitled Slow Burning. He mentioned as a slow genocide, and also supported by another scholar, Mongzani, and he also mentioned it as a slow burning genocide. So genocide doesn't occur within a couple of years or even a decade. It is a very planned action to persecute a group of people which you do not think to be yours. Now I'll quickly give you some idea about the acknowledgement of Rohingyas' rights as a minority in the state of Rakhine. So by the way, Rakhine is the new name of the state of Arakan. Arakan is the traditional name. And if you see the statement that I quoted here, former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and his foundation was tasked to study the situation in Rakhine. And what he said as the chair of the advisory commission, and I quote, unless concerted action led by the government and aided by all sectors of the government and society is taken soon, we risk the return of another cycle of violence and radicalization, which will further deepen the chronic poverty that afflicts Rakhine state. And this report was completed and handed over to Aung San Suu Kyi, as you see in the screen, in 2017. And there is a good bit of coincidence, because this report was handed in the month of August 2017, and the largest exodus happened in the same month of the August 2017. Just a coincidence. We do not have any proper data to substantiate this link. This is what Myanmar government explained why the security operations had been carried out that expelled 750,000 of Rohingyas in August 2017. This is a group very less known, and we still struggle to find out the credibility of this group. However, they have a Twitter account, and BBC covered at some point of time the photos of the leader of the group. And this is what kind of I had in terms of the presentation today. But I'll just quickly switch to the discussion mode here. Just to end here is that the idea of minority and Rohingyas within it is pretty straightforward to me. And the reason I say that with a little bit of claim that we have seen a very set pattern of stripping them from all kind of citizenship related, what you call rights, as we call citizens' rights from Myanmar. And it was very deliberate. And it started, as I showed you the timeline, right from 1948, the inception of the state of Myanmar. Although that 14 years, we do technically acknowledge that Rohingyas were part of the greater Myanmar state. But since it is a very systematic way of penalizing this particular group, this is why we say that it's a pure genocide, and minorities, just all the minorities in Myanmar, as I said in the beginning, are at risk of being kind of going into extinction in the state of Myanmar. So I'll stop here, and I'll invite and I'll expect if you have any questions comparing these two cases. So at this stage, I believe it's time Thomas to come in and present his part of the presentation, and he's our last speaker in today's panel, ladies and gentlemen. So here I hand over to Thomas Shacklock from London, UK.
Hello, thank you for that. To start with, sorry, I do not have a presentation to share, but I will touch upon some of the things that Dr. Stanton opened up the talk with. We can talk a bit more about what genocide is. So that's what I'm covering. What is genocide? And I guess the good place to start is with the general definition of genocide. And that is, according to the convention, the UN Convention on Genocide, it means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And that involves killing members of the group. That can involve causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. It can also be inflicting life conditions which are destructive to the lives of these groups of people and to bring about its physical destruction. And that again is in whole or in part, or imposing measures on the measures on the group intended to prevent the births. And that is what Dr. Stanton referred to earlier regarding the rape or the mass rapes of these groups of people, and then also forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And we have seen that in the cases such as with many conflicts and many forms of genocide as well. So what this short discussion will do is, although I do at Genocide Watch as a research and analyst cover the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and other countries in Central Africa, and although we do also cover the case of the Rohingya at Genocide Watch as well, I'm going to put the issue of genocide in the context of other genocides as well. And that involves me going through the 10 stages of genocide, which is a very important and useful model, which we use at our organization to help identify the different stages of genocide, both the early stages, the later stages, and then also afterwards, the stage of denialism, which is definitely some of the most, where most of the complications can arise, especially at the International Criminal Court, for example, and it can get incredibly controversial. So the first stage of genocide is a classification, and that's when you identify a group of people as being different. And as we've discussed today so far, not belonging to a particular country, not belonging to a population or a territory or a city, an area within a country, separating them from the majority of a country's population. That is where you can start unfolding the other stages of genocide. Once you do that, that should already start ringing alarm bells. And then following that, the second stage is symbolization. And that was definitely a very, very effective and notorious technique used in the Holocaust, because of course Jewish people had to wear the star to be identified as others, to be identified as the group that the Nazi regime were going to be persecuting. And it was also the case, as Dr. Stanton referred to earlier with Rwanda, that the Tutsis had ID cards to mark their difference from the majority Hutu population. And then after that, you've got the stage of discrimination, which again should be raising alarm bells that this could go further into other forms of persecution and later on mass murder and extermination, what we understand as genocide. And discrimination can happen on a political level, it can happen on an economic level or a social level. People can be excluded from standing for office, people can be excluded from having particular jobs and from even attending school. And that can most easily happen if you remove the rights of a particular group of people. So that has happened with the Rohingya and the Banyamulenge, as we've discussed today. And just to pause there before I continue going through the other stages of genocide, this goes to show how much of an ongoing process it is. We use this model at Genocide Watch to really highlight how it's not just a single event, genocide. When I started working at Genocide Watch and mentioned it to my family in a Zoom call at the beginning of lockdown, one of my family members said that's very interesting, because normally you don't know that genocide has happened until it's happened. And that's obviously a huge misconception that we need to overcome for all forms of discrimination and symbolization and a classification on a global level. The genocides of the Rohingya and the Banyamulenge have been going on since the colonial era. The moment that colonial rulers separated these people into different groups and said that one was more important than the other, one had more rights than the other, that set the precedent for a genocide that could happen a century, maybe even 2 centuries later. And it was a very dangerous move from the very beginning. And we can say that in the West, we have managed to get away with that responsibility in the grand scheme of things. So moving on from that, once we have discrimination, the following stage, and I say following because another point to make, just pausing there, is that this is not always a linear process, but we do follow it in this order because that is normally the most logical order. That's what we've seen with the Rwanda genocide, and then also with the Holocaust under the Nazi regime. But following that, you often get the stage of dehumanization. And that is similar to symbolization, where you can use symbols and images to represent the group of people as being different, but it's much more powerful and insidious than that, because you are dehumanizing this group of people. You are presenting them as not being human beings, often as animals. We saw it in Rwanda, where the Tutsis were compared to cockroaches, a very, very damaging image that was created about them. And that happens on a global scale all the time. The next stage is organization. And this is perhaps where you can also cause the most denialism as well, because organization is almost always needed to commit a full-on genocide, the extermination process, because it can happen and be perpetrated by militia groups, non-state actors, but it can also be perpetrated and organized by the state itself, by a government, as was definitely the case with the Holocaust. So the Nazi regime on a state level organized the Holocaust of the Jewish people and other minorities. And then also the Myanmar government are very much so arguably complicit, if not organizing the persecution and genocide of the Rohingya. With Rwanda, it's a bit more of a grey area. There were definitely non-state actors, Hutu extremists, who were organizing and perpetrating the genocide, but you could also say that the state was involved as well, the way that it was funded, the way that they funded the media. But it was more or less a state-led genocide. But organization, and we can come back to this later in talking about the final stage, is where you can get different degrees of denialism. How can you prove that certain groups organized this on a large level? How can you prove that this was planned and prepared in advance? And it always is the case anyway. It's just a matter of people being motivated to deny a certain genocide. Following that, you do have polarization. So once the genocide is getting underway, the differences that the perpetrators of genocide create can become much more evident within a society. People will develop more of an us versus them mentality. The hatreds will grow, and that can also facilitate the involvement of members of the public, of citizens, to help perpetrate a genocide, as we of course saw in Rwanda. Again, you had the Hutu extremist radio station encouraging ordinary people to pick up weapons, to pick up machetes, and help perpetrate the genocide of the Tutsi. So that's where polarization becomes a very, very effective and dangerous tool as well. And that does tie into preparation. Preparation can also tie into organization. If you have an organized group of people who are willing to perpetrate a genocide against the victim group, then they will also prepare the tools needed to do that, the weapons in particular. In the case of the Holocaust, it was gas chambers as well as the ghettos. The ghettos were already an effective way to gather the victim group, Jewish people, in one area, then the trains to deport them to the concentration camps, and then finally you prepare on that very, very organized level the gas chambers to commit the act of extermination. So preparation is again where at Genocide Watch we would call it a genocide emergency, that this mass murder is very likely to happen. In fact, it is ready to happen. Persecution is when the victim group are facing levels of harassment and intimidation. You could argue that does actually happen all the way through the different stages anyway, but we particularly call it persecution when you have mass arrests. Again, in the case of the Holocaust, you did have the deportations, sending them to the concentration camps, even putting them in the ghetto. That's when you can call it a persecuted group. Right now, we've got the Rohingya who are displaced. That is also a form of persecution, in addition to the fact that many of them have been killed as well. And what we have at stage 9 is called extermination, the word which I've referred to quite a lot already, which is what most people's understanding of genocide actually is. It is that episode of mass murder and widespread murder, and it is what people think genocide only is, but it is, of course, as I've said, this ongoing process that is the official genocide. And after that, we have denialism. And as I said before, that there are many forms of denial. There are, of course, people who deny that the Holocaust even happened, for example. That's a very extreme form of denialism. But there are also, adding to these 10 stages of genocide, there are also different ways in which you can deny a genocide happened. And that is by questioning the figures. Is it a large enough number of people who have been killed? Or is it Is it fair to call it genocide if the victim group, as Delphin referred to earlier, have also been involved in some killings? Well, often they might have to kill in self-defense, or they've been pushed into a cycle of violence or a triangle of violence, which then the perpetrators and deniers of genocide will then use, as far as they're concerned, as evidence of no genocide, or as a lack of proof of there being a genocide. But evidence of violence on the part of one group should not be used against evidence of genocide for the perpetrator group. It doesn't justify denying a genocide. So denialism can come in many forms, and it can definitely be very controversial on the long term as well. Now, I think another question which is necessary to ask, in addition to what is genocide, is why does it matter? Many people might ask, isn't mass murder in general, or any form of killing or conflict, a bad thing? Why do we need to get into the debate of defining a genocide, identifying a genocide, and then calling it genocide on a legal level as well, at the International Criminal Court, for example? And I'd say there are three main reasons why. The first is that in identifying a victim group, following the model of the 10 stages of genocide as well, the different stages that a victim group has been subjected to, in identifying that, you're able to give extra protection to that group, where they might be more vulnerable, they might be disadvantaged in a conflict. Again, it doesn't always have to be a conflict, because again, in Nazi Germany, there wasn't a conflict between the majority of the German population and the Jewish minority population. They were just targeted for persecution and genocide anyway. So you need to give them that extra protection. But also, if you can identify that any of these stages of genocide are underway, then you can prepare for one of the later stages to arrive, starting at classification and discrimination, those earlier stages, which we see on a global level. Even if we don't see the same levels of mass violence on a global level, you should always be anticipating one of the other stages to happen later on. And then I'd say thirdly, for closure, if you call it genocide on a legal level, that brings a lot of closure to a group that has experienced a collective trauma. And it's not just a matter of murder or conflict and other forms of persecution, but by acknowledging that it is genocide, that can go a long way for a group of people who have to experience that collective trauma. So that's all I have today, and that hopefully has put what the Banyamulenge and the Rohingya and many other groups have gone through into a bit more context, and how we analyse it at Genocide Watch for our reports and advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas, for, I would say, very important backdrop of how do you compare cases when you talk about genocide. And it was a very, I would say, a clear explanation that Thomas brought for all of us to understand the stages of genocide as well. So thank you, Thomas, for bringing us all to the same level of understanding. So ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, we are in the Q&A session now officially. And just to be cautious about time, we would like to invite Mr. Maitre John Tibasima, and he was patiently waiting to speak his experience and ideas from Ituri. So Mr. Maitre, floor is yours, and we would like to request that in order to be, just to be conscious about time, you will have 5 minutes to discuss the points that you have. Mr. Maitre, floor is yours. Just unmute the mic, please. Mr. Maitre John, can you hear us? No? Mr. Maitre, can you here. Okay, I think it's moving. Okay, so if you unmute the mic, I think we can hear you. Okay, I think Mr. Maitre John has some connection issues going on here. So let's listen from. Okay, Mr. Matrix, are you able to join us? Okay, I think we'll wait for him if he is able to join us later in the discussion. So we'll go to Adele Tibasima, who's actually would be moderating our fourth session. And Ms. Adele, floor is yours if you want to add something. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. I don't know why this.
We can hear you, but little.
The echoes. Okay, great. Yeah, I was saying thank you so much for you and Dr. Ntanyoma for inviting us and allowing us to be part of this discussion. I learned so much. I learned about the similarities. Thomas, great presentation. I was taking notes and I was like, okay, where are we now? I think we're in denial right now. So, I mean, I know I'm speaking with, in the fourth session, but I came to really learn and listen. And now I have so many questions. Dr. Greg, thank you so much for the work that you have done. I've told Delphin before that us having his piece on Genocide Watch is it's an amazing evidence that when I send it to a congressman or like a senator, they're like, oh, it kind of gives us the even a much more credibility that we need to really shed light on what's happening in Minembwe. One of the challenges that we see is that we go out and we talk about what's happening, and people here are willing to listen and take notes. But then when you hear what's coming from the Congolese government, especially the officials, they label it as an inter-ethnic violence. It kind of discredited what we're saying, that this is a genocide. At least for me, in 2004, my family, we were survivors of Gatumba massacre. And the very same words that were being told to us as we were leaving Uvira, and those the very same words that were being used as they were killing us, are the very same words that we're hearing in Minembwe, in Ituri, and, to all the Banyamulenge who are being arrested in Uvira for just looking as Banyamulenge, for being suspected to have joined a self-defense group in Minembwe. So it's the same thing. It's just a cycle. And I remember my mom telling me that she was raised running, fleeing, being called like your nose is too thin and you're thin, and being described physically, just pointing out some basically her features, and now she's saying that, look at you guys now, if you had not left, you would be doing the same thing with your own children. So it's just like a cycle of being labeled as foreigners and you don't belong, you should be in this country, and it's really something. And I saw Dr. Lazar was asking at one point who stops this. We thought, having the MONUSCO there, this would end. But I was there. Now I'm 30 years old. I was in Congo, and MONUSCO was there. We thought this was coming to an end, and now it's been 30 years, and I mean, things got even worse, I would say. So for me, I guess I should, what I was gonna say as part of the diaspora, as a chairwoman of the diaspora of Banyamulenge here in the States, we have been very, very overwhelmed with responding to the crisis that lacks the international community to intervene. This crisis is at a scale where you need the whole international community to intervene. You need the country to intervene, but there have been absolutely zero international community interventions in Minembwe or the DRC government. So we're basically left to do everything, to feed malnourished children who are dying, the rampant diseases in Minembwe and the IDP camps. It's really a challenge, and the remoteness of the area is very. It's something that I have never experienced as a Banyamulenge, and I was born and raised there. And like I said, I survived many attacks as well. But the level of the attacks and the way we have been confined in this remote area, unable to move from one area to another without being attacked and killed and raped, is something that we actually have never seen. So I know we're pressed for the time. I reserve more of my comments in my session, but I have a lot of questions for Dr. Greg and Thomas and everyone else who have presented. Very well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Adil, for your participation. We all acknowledge and acknowledge your case, of course. We'll talk further in the fourth session as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's try to listen from Mr. John Maitre. John, can you speak now? I mean, you are here. We see. Do you want to? If you can unmute the mic, we can possibly listen to you. Okay, I think Mr. John is still trying to connect. In the meantime, let's listen from George Budagu Makoto, and he's also patiently waiting with us since the beginning. And George will join us in the subsequent session. So, George, if you have any points to add with others, go ahead, sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. I think this is a very nice conversation that we're having here, and I've been longing to see more of this. And I cannot thank enough Dr. Stanton for a very good presentation, but also Thomas and everybody, and Dr. Ahmed and Delphin. I mean, this is, I think, the beginning of a solution, because I'm very keenly tuned into awareness. I always think that once something is aware by people, that's the beginning of a solution. But I have so many questions that can go on and on. But there's one thing that struck me about the fear of the majority versus the minority. But why is that the majority are always afraid of minority? If that would be my question to Dr. Greg. Is any insight about that? Because if you look at the history, there is a in Rwanda, the Hutu are the majority, but yet they're afraid of Tutsis. In Burundi, in Congo, that same thing is happening. We just heard about the Rohingya, and even everywhere you look at this pattern. Why is that? Is there any insight? The other question is the indifference that we're all talking about here, and the denial, and that's something that I've been struggling with for the last several years that I've lived here in the United States. Why is that it takes a long time for people to recognize that people are dying? They are human race, or their fellow human beings are being killed. And when somebody screaming and saying that, look, I'm being killed here, I'm tortured, I'm discriminated, and all other things that you just mentioned, and here people just stand and be indifferent on the situation. And the other thing is that we can talk about, it has nothing to do with the number. Even if it's 2 or 3 people who are killed, because of who they are, that's a genocide. And in the case of the Banyamulenge, I think that's what we've been struggling with. Unless they want to see a number of 1 million like in Rwanda, it's now called a genocide. So those are the questions that we can probably explain to the public that, look, if it's one person is targeted because of who he is, or that should be called a genocide and has to be stopped, and so forth. So thank you. And if Dr. Greg can give us some insight on those, and I know you have a lot to say, but in brief way.
Thank you, George, for joining us. And we'll keep the questions and then finally go to Dr. Gregory and get some of his insights. So, Mr. John, we see you have joined again. Can you speak? Do you see us? Just unmute the mic. Let's see once again if you can join us. Okay, I think we'll go ahead now. So if we find Dr. Lazari with us, Lazari, do you have a question for our panelist speakers or any observations, sir?
Yes, thank you so much for the presentations. I was very much thrilled by your presentations, and of course, they raised many questions, as George was saying. But one question I would ask is, we have heard about all these genocides happening. We have also genocide that happened. Thomas explained very well about the stages. Now, we are in a global village. These things are not happening in isolation. Now, who should stop genocide? And when should it be done? We have governments, we have international community, we have UN, and I'm very sure, I've been watching when Rohingya people were being killed, on TV. I've been in Minembwe, and all these things have been happening in my eyes. I have welcomed in Minembwe different dignitaries, be it UN, diplomats, and the government officials from Congo. Actually, even this week, I'm hosting ministers from Kinshasa coming to Minembwe, and yet the killing continues, the hate speech continues, speeches continue. We don't see any decision or any measures being taken to stop. I think I would be very much interested to hear about your views, apart from the theories, practically, what can be done to stop this, and when should it be done? Should we wait until we are finished, as it happened in Rwanda, as it happened with the Holocaust with Jewish people and others? When should we do it? And if the world doesn't stand and do it, are the victims themselves legitimate to defend themselves? And when they do it, when does it become a legitimate defense? And when does it turn to be a crime? Because what I'm seeing is what we are living right now. I have one question.
So if you finish, Dr. Lazari, okay.
Yes,
Adil, quickly, I will take your question. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead, Adil.
Thank you so much. Quickly, thank you so much. So, as an advocate, I also have a question. When we are presented with all this evidence of genocide happening, and you put it out there, but the government and the MONUSCO sometimes contradicts the facts that the civilians are living in. What should we do? Because I tend to see that the government put out a narrative and the MONUSCO follows it. And so the little people like us, we're left to we become incredible. Basically, we don't have credibility as MONUSCO, as a powerful government, and the MONUSCO, you know, whatever they say goes. So what can we do when the government contradicts the true narrative of what people are living in?
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions, and I would invite our research assistant Orti, and she has joined from Bangladesh, and she worked on Rohingya cases in the past. So Orti, if your question, please.
First of all, I want to thank our presenters and our keynote speaker. It was really precise, but at the same time, it was very informative. And I don't want to take much time. I just have one question for Dr. Stanton. You mentioned that the perpetrators should be brought under justice or go through proper trial. So do you think that political structure or the diplomatic relationships among the countries would be an issue here, or is that really possible overcoming this for a country like Bangladesh? Thank you. That's all I want to ask you, really.
Thank you, Orti. I think it's an important question at the policy level. From the general audience, we have received a number of questions actually, but as I said, we just have to be cautious about time. I'm taking only 2 questions because some of them are actually based on similar theme about intervention. And we have heard from Georges, Dr. Lazare, that how do you actually intervene, who should intervene, and when. So I'll take only one question, kind of overarching here, and it is flashed on the screen for everybody's understanding. And it's talking about Convention of Statelessness. And is there any new policies coming out, and what the United Nations is going to do something about statelessness? So with this, what we'll do is we'll switch to the speakers today, those who presented, and I would like to begin with our keynote speaker and Professor Dr. Stanton to kindly comment on some of the questions that came from the floor. Dr. Gregory, it's your time now, sir.
Thank you. I will try to answer these really deep and difficult questions. Oh my goodness sakes. I mean, the first one, why do majorities fear minorities? Oh, wow. That is huge. And you're right about that. You know, genocides are usually perpetrated by majorities against minorities. Not always. I mean, in the case, for instance, of the Sunni Muslim genocides against the Kurds and against the Shia Muslims in Iraq, for instance, it was a minority that, you know, perpetrated the genocide against those. The Shia were the majority. Anyway, but the main point that you're making is, I think, valid. I mean, a lot of genocides are actually popular. That is, they're supported by the people. If you want to take a look at that, you just look at Rwanda, you look at the Nazis, you look at systematic tyrannies like what you had in the Soviet Union and China and so forth. And what I think is that you have to have 2 things. First of all, you have to have an underlying base of grievance that is, let us say, especially directed at the targeted or victim group. In other words, where you have a scapegoat, that you can blame for your economic troubles or, you know, your social problems or whatever in that society. You say, oh, yeah, that's because of the Jews, you know, or that's because of the Tutsis. And so that's an underlying cultural sort of base that allows for genocide. And that is what we are undergoing right here in the United States right now. We have this attempt to development against immigrants, against, and of course, for many years, against Black people, against Jews. I mean, we have had all that here in the United States. But the second thing that you always have to have for a genocide, you have to have a planning group. You have to have normally a demagogic leader who is going to take charge and harness that underlying cultural hatred and turn it into genocide. Because genocide is a group crime. It's not, you know, an individual going into a McDonald's and, you know, with a machine gun and shooting people. That's not genocide. What you have instead is a group crime in which it's intentionally, the intent is to destroy, at least in part, you know, a group. And as Thomas has explained, Genocide Watch uses Lemkin's broader definition of genocide in our prevention efforts. We realize that for legal prosecutions, you have to use the Genocide Convention, which limits it to, you know, national, ethnic, racial, and religious groups. But we believe that Lemkin was right, that cultural and economic and social groups really are, and political groups are also, should have been included in the Genocide Convention. They were excluded, in fact, by colonial powers plus the Soviet Union, all of whom had committed genocide. So they didn't want those groups in the convention. They knew they'd be guilty. So that is at least an attempt to get at sort of the underlying dynamic, the cultural base and the need for a leader or leaders. And then we had this second question, who should stop genocide? Oh, wow, that's a big one. And practically, and that's right. Well, I think Tom, because he showed you, I think, that genocide's a process, not an event. What it allows you to do is you can see it developing and you can take steps to halt each of these processes in its tracks. And by the way, it's very important to remember that this is not a linear model or a linear process. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These processes go on simultaneously often. But they're dependent on each other. They're really, each of them is a process itself. It's so if you see, classification that is then used for discrimination, which we, for instance, find here in the United States, we had, classification of people in our own Constitution, where we called slaves 3/5 of a person, and then of course, even after the Civil War, we had segregation and systematic discrimination against African Americans here. So that when you see that, you need to take action. The first thing, of course, the thing that really broke the back of the segregation system finally, and it still hasn't broken it completely at all, were laws. We needed civil rights laws that actually would enforce the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution that were, passed after the Civil War, guaranteeing the right to vote and equal protection of laws and so forth. Unless you had actually effective laws, you couldn't really combat the classification and the discrimination. There are some stages, though, where you just have to raise hell. I mean, when you hear dehumanizing language, like calling people coming across the southern border of the United States robbers and rapists, you should just raise hell. You should say, look, that is simply false. It is also dehumanizing. We cannot accept that in our country. And that sort of dehumanizing language, as you know, is going on right now. You have it in hate speech all over the world against groups that are targeted. Against the Rohingya, for instance, it was Facebook that made it possible to really target the Rohingya. And it was widespread. 900,000 people use Facebook in Myanmar, and it was spread by extremist Buddhist monks and so forth. So, in other words, the question about who should stop genocide is it should be stopped at each of these stages, and at each stage, different people need to take action. The practical question that you were asking, I think, also had to do with intervention. And you asked the very hard question, how and when should you have intervention? Well, my experience has been that the UN has been largely ineffective in stopping genocide. And it's not always ineffective. There have been some successful cases. I think it was effective in stopping the genocide in Macedonia, where there was a UN resolution. We had, I think, but it's and I think that there's also been really effective interventions, and the most effective have been by regional organizations. Nigeria intervened, for instance, and the ECOWAS countries. It was a regional organization, intervened in Sierra Leone and Liberia and stopped the genocide. The ASEAN countries intervened in East Timor and stopped that genocide. In Kosovo, NATO intervened and stopped that genocide. So I think regional organizations actually have a lot that they can do. And it doesn't even have to be an organization. It can be countries just around the place where people are being targeted. I know for a fact, for instance, that when Nkurunziza, who was the president of Burundi, announced he was going to run for a third term, even though it was against the Constitution, and then some of his followers in the legislature started to use dehumanizing speech about Tutsis. I called some people out there in Central Africa, including Paul Kagame, and I said, you have to let them know that if they're going to have a genocide against Tutsis in Burundi, you are going to send in the Rwandan army and stop it. And they did. And it did stop it. So, the whole problem, though, in Burundi is it's been slow genocide. And so you still got it going on, I'm afraid. But nevertheless, I think regional intervention is actually more effective than UN intervention. Now, the question then is, when does the defense become legitimate? As you know, the Kosovo intervention was considered illegitimate by a lot of countries because it hadn't been passed by the UN Security Council, and wouldn't have been because there would have been a Russian veto. However, it was a NATO intervention, and a lot of us think it was legitimate because under Article 8 of the UN Charter, regional organizations have the power to intervene without getting UN approval before they intervene. They're supposed to go back to the UN and have the UN look at it, but that worked. And so I would say that's one way to go. And in fact, I would argue we need a reassertion of the powers of the General Assembly, the UN General Assembly. Under the Uniting for Peace resolution, which authorized, as you know, the Korean police action and 13 other interventions, including in the Congo, in the Suez, and other places. A lot of people don't know this. Those were authorized by the UN General Assembly, not by the Security Council. Under the Uniting for Peace resolution, if the Security Council is paralyzed, there's a procedure by which they can then refer the matter to the General Assembly, and that's what they did. And so I think we need to reassert that. it would allow us to break this paralysis that we now have in the UN Security Council. So those are just a few attempts to answer some questions. I think that there was one other question by Ms. Orti, who asked about, trials and how you can bring perpetrators to justice. And I couldn't hear the question too clearly, I have to say, because of some interferences. But it had something to do with the political aspects of that. And I understand that because you're in Bangladesh, where it's been very political. So that's why I, for one, am in favor of mixed tribunals or international tribunals. International tribunals created by the UN Security Council are probably not going to be created very often because they're so doggone expensive. I created 2 of them. So the ICTR was, I wrote the UN resolutions that created that. But it cost $2 billion or more. And so the UN's not going to do that very often. And I also had a big hand in creating the Cambodian tribunal. And for that tribunal, we decided to do a mixed tribunal in which it was the Cambodian government plus a UN General Assembly resolution that created that tribunal, and it cost a lot less. And even though it was only able to try a few people, nevertheless, it was a very important, I think, educational trial system for Cambodia. I remember working in Cambodia in 1980. So many people asked me, why did they do this? They just had no idea. And so this trial made it clear. They did it because they were communists. They did it because they actually believed Marxist, Leninist, and Maoist theory. I mean, it was, there's the enemies of the people, and so you better kill them. I mean, it finally made that clear to a lot of Cambodians. So those are the sorts of things. That's where I think having an international contribution to national trials, where you have mixed trials, I think is a good way to go forward. I'd like to see that, for instance, for Syria and Iraq right now. The ISIS people, I think ultimately I'd like to put a whole lot of groups in Syria on trial. But, it's, for me, it helps to establish an objectivity that transcends political forces. Sorry to go on so long.
Thank you, Professor, very much for clarifying at least some of the core questions that was raised today. So, the audience, we are at the last end. And just to recap, we have heard from our keynote speaker. He has given us a broad overview. And most importantly, I think we all were benefited, as well as our audience, from his enormous experience working in this particular field of genocide intervention and human rights matters. And then we have had detailed overview of the case of Banyamulenge in Eastern Congo by Delphin, who is also the co-organizer of today's 4-part seminar today. And I tried to portray the Rohingya case within the bigger framework of minorities in Myanmar. And Rohingya case is quite extraordinary, although it has very many similarities that we heard from the case of Congo. And you can find the details in subsequent sessions. We have more 3 sessions on Rohingyas. I hope we'll talk more about that. And specifically, we would like to share with you, dear audience, in the follow-up sessions about the aspects of hate speech and how it can be deployed against a minority. And Rohingya is a very interesting case. We have documented Facebook and WhatsApp and these 2 platforms, which were extensively used to mobilize 2012 riot in Sitwe, and which exactly is the prelude to the 2017 Exodus. So we'll share more in the subsequent session, so please tune in. And finally, we have learned quite a bit from Thomas as he laid out the details of the stages and how the genocide is defined. And finally, you have heard again from Professor Gregory as he clarified some of our questions. So as a tradition also from our side, we go back to the keynote speaker just to have his last words today. And after he listening from him, we would say goodbye. So Dr. Gregory Stanton, your last words for all of us today.
I think my last words is never give up hope.
So that was very precise, and I would say very timely. Never give up hope. So, dear audience and ladies and gentlemen, we would end here. And I'd like to finally also welcome Delphin. If you want to add something to close this session today, and we know we have subsequent sessions in next 4 weeks. But as a co-facilitator and co-coordinator of this session, Delphin, if you want to add something before we say officially goodbye.
Thank you so much. I think I don't have anything to add, but I will invite our participants to watch next sessions, and we make sure maybe we get some of the key questions and elaborate on them next time.
Thank you so much. Stay well, dear audience, and we are very grateful for the esteemed panelists, especially the keynote speaker, to appear today and share their works and experience and insights. And these are very important dialogues that we must have, as you have heard from Professor Gregory, that we must raise hell, if I quote him correctly. And that is one of the ways to kind of, draw attention from the international community. So please tune in and have a look in our main website, www.crric.org. In short, CRRIC.org. We'll post the subsequent sessions and the speakers, and we'll be very happy if you kindly join. And as I conclude, let me also share with you, in throughout this session of 2 hours and 12 minutes as of now, we had over 100 people viewing directly and interacting with us in various platforms. And this is why, as I said, the kind of dialogues are very, very important in order to stop genocide. So goodbye from Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Canada. Stay well wherever you are. Stay safe. Bye. Thank you very much.